The thoughts, views, and comments expressed by Sidebar, its guests, callers, and advisors are not necessarily those of the management, ownership, or production unit of ILS Verizon Media Group. Sidebar, a 103.5 The Beat podcast, is a production of ILTV Studios and may not be reproduced or represented, in part or in its entirety, without the express written consent of Verizon Media Group. Sidebar is the intellectual property of Verizon Media Group. Copyright 2024. All rights reserved.
This is Sidebar, a 103 The Beat podcast powered by ILTV. I'm Stephen Hanna. Now that the by-election is over, I feel like I can actually talk about politics without getting too deep into trouble. I'm probably still going to get into trouble, but, you know, it's the price of telling the truth. I have a question. Like, who is really running the country? The answer won't astonish you. Rich people. With that said, I would like to talk about how the government actually works. Or, depending on your perspective, how it doesn't work. Don't worry. I'm not going to rant. Or maybe I will. We'll see. It occurs to me that while the average Bahamian has some political opinion, I don't think that we necessarily care about what is government. And you might say, that's not true, Stephen. Of course I care about government. But, do we? Do we actually? I mean, how many of us know what an MP is supposed to be doing? How many of us know how many senators there are supposed to be? I know I have to look it up constantly. I still don't remember. Even something as simple as how much is your deposit when you run to be a member of parliament? And then, like, what do you have to do in order to get that deposit back if you lose? Now, you need 1/6 of the vote to get your deposit back, in case you're wondering. So, in the by-election, there are a couple of people who are now short $400. But the entire point of the process is lost if no one knows what the point of the process is. You are bound to be frustrated and upset and feel as though the government has failed you if you don't know what the government is supposed to be doing, at least on different levels. There is most likely somebody that is responsible for the thing that you are upset about. But if the people that you are upset at are not responsible for the thing that you are upset about, being upset at them only makes your life hard, their life hard, and the problem unresolved. And you know what? Even if they resolve the problem, because it's not actually their responsibility, what happens is that you are constantly having to go to them for something that has nothing to do with them. They're more likely to forget because it's not on their list of things to do. It has nothing to do with them. And now you're upset with your MP because you feel like they didn't throw a big enough Christmas party. And listen. God bless you if you have an MP that throws wonderful Christmas parties. But that's not their responsibility. Their responsibility is something else. Don't get me wrong. I also measured MPs by that standard. I used to think that all the time. But that's how you end up getting swing into saying things like, where the VAT money gone? Which I am guilty of saying. Only to have the same people who were saying it before election turn around and then answer the question definitively, oh, It's in the consolidated fund. Because they were aware of where the VAT money was. But they were just using my ignorance and your ignorance and our ignorance to further their political machinations. They know how the system works. But we don't know the basics, so we end up getting swing. When you realize what is actually happening, what's actually going on, life becomes, I'm going to say, slightly easier. It doesn't become like perfect, but it makes more sense because now I know who to go to get things done. Now I know where to go. Because if you don't know these things, you're going to be in a worse position every year. Things are going to get inevitably worse. So that's why today I would like to talk with you about the government. I think it might be like capital G government. The concept of government in the Bahamas. How it works. If it actually works. And then I, unprovoked, will slide in my suggestions to some things that I think I'll just point out. Like, okay, this thing, we might need to tweak it on this side. Now, we're not going to cover the entire government. We're mostly going to just focus on the executive and the legislative branch, which is kind of the same thing. And honestly, I don't think we even have a lot of time to even dive too deep into that. But let's begin. The Bahamas is based on, or the government that we use in the Bahamas is based on the Westminster system. Is it like the Westminster system? No. I mean, yes, in some ways. Anyway, I'm going to keep referring back to the British system. So I just wanted to mention that. But anyway, let's start at the top. Who is our head of state? Now, you would think that it would be the prime minister, right? Because that's who's in the photos whenever we have some sort of international head of state event. But our head of state is King Charles II, which is such an odd thing. Like, what does he do as the head of state? Do we send him to represent our interests anywhere? No. Does he have any diplomatic duties on our behalf? Like, does he meet and greet other foreign dignitaries and other foreign heads of state for us? No. At least in England, he does those things. But the truth is, the crown, in reality, is responsible for pretty much nothing. They don't actually get to make choices or decisions. In fact, technically, they're not allowed to disagree with the elected officials in Parliament. And that's in Britain. Parliament tells them, hey, we'd like to do this thing. And then they say, okay. Apparently, no British royal has told Parliament no since like the 1700s, before America was formed. They've never used any sort of power or flexed any of it. They're 100% just figureheads. They're just decorations. Now, with that said, if it's just a decoration, and the decoration is no longer fashionable, it's not even something that any of us like anymore. Like, what is the point of the decoration? Why is the decoration there? We could totally use that space efficiently in our constitutional democracy. We could use that space to actually help balance power and bring better governance to the country. So, the Governor General represents the British Crown. which I guess is theoretically the Bahamian crown. That's the head of state. Then we have the executive, legislative, judicial, and the executive branches of government. Now, in an ideal world, you would have some level of separation between the executive branch and the legislative branch. But we don't. We don't live in an ideal world. All of our powers are doubled up on itself. Our executive branch is made up of the legislative branch. So if the legislative branch is making crazy decisions, they're out of control, they're doing all type of wild stuff, who's going to stop that? Do we have to wait 5 years to reconcile that? We don't have anybody that could veto that? Well, theoretically, I mean, I guess that would be the crown. But see, it's weird because they all serve at the pleasure of the crown, but we've already established that the crown doesn't do anything except nod. So I know, so if you're in doubt of that, just go look at any speech from the throne. All right? If everyone was a good guy, you would have nothing to worry about. But we have safeguards because the world is full of fallible people where everybody isn't a good guy. That's why some countries have presidents and prime ministers. Right now, what we have is a governor. In our present form, we have a governor general that is selected, well, let me use the right word, recommended by the prime minister at the time. And so think about it. Even if the governor general wanted to disagree with the prime minister and do the unprecedented thing of disagreeing with the prime minister, they were recommended by a prime minister. So, I mean, what's the chances of that happening? Now, with that said, if we were ever to get in some sort of situation where we voted for the governor general or we had like some presidential type of figurehead, I don't know if I'd want us to vote directly for them because it would be too easy for that to become a popularity competition. And then we would have the same loopholes and issues that we have now. We just would have done it with more steps. You know what I mean? Also, if we're going to give that position the power to veto laws and stuff, not only should we make the decision to pick that person, like, for lack of a better term, difficult. Like, I want you to think about it. Don't just pick this person because they have straight teeth. You have to ask yourself the question, why are we putting all this power in one human person? Personally, I can't think of a single person who everybody likes, let alone a single person who everybody trusts. And then to put all that power in that person? So hear me out. What if our executive was not one person, but like a council of people? So we wouldn't have a president. We'd have like a presidential council. It has to be an odd number of people. Because, tiebreaker. I'm thinking 3, but that's just to avoid having to pay out a bunch of pensions whenever they move off the scene. Because you don't want to have 9 people that you got to constantly be paid every 10 years. 9 different people got to get paid this exorbitant pension. Anyway, it has to be an odd number in case you need a tiebreaker. All right? And then we can vote for the council. Now, these would be people who maybe they're submitted by the parties or the independents. But in order to balance it, you would limit the amount of people that a party can propose as their representative on the council. All right? So it'd be like if it's only 3 positions, a party can only push for and say, okay, this is my person who I would like to be on the council. This is my they can only have one person. And then You'd also need standards, right? You can't just have every Joe Blow saying, I'd like to run to be on the Presidential Council of the Bahamas. Like, for example, I would not qualify, right? These need to be people who have served in the civil service in some significant way, or maybe they're former prime ministers, or they've done some great work in law. So we need concrete evidence, measurable evidence that they are wise enough to know when to say no, but also sensible enough to not just veto everything that comes their way out of some petty vindictive agenda that was unresolved from when they were prime minister or something. Anyway, here's the most important thing. These people have to have nothing to gain. Because if we're putting this much power into this position, once they're in that position, you don't want them setting up things in a way that when they leave that position, they gain massive wealth. So like once you're in that position, one, you can't stay there longer than 10 years. But also when you leave that position, you cannot go back to being an elected official, or you can't hold any government position once you become a part of this executive council. Lock the door. Basically, that would assure that any choice that is being made is based on you wanting the Bahamas to be a better place for you to live, and not you setting up some maniacal way for you to get $30 million worth of contracts. On some level, we already kind of understand that idea, right? It's not written on paper, but I mean, think about it. We've never had a governor general, after they become governor general, turn around and say, hey man, I want to run for parliament again. That's kind of a locked door. But I mean, I feel like that might just be like a handshake locked door. We need it to be like firm, written on paper, so that when somebody does this, they're only doing it for the right reason, for legacy. Okay, so that's the first one.
So you want a space, but not just any space. You need something with a little more potential. So how about 1,000 square feet of room to play with? Superb audio and video production capability, digital LED wall, full lighting grid, and about 124 seats to accommodate a full studio audience, with so many other features. Make us your home for your next concert, conference, and so much more. Honestly, the possibilities are endless. Here at ILTV Studios, we'd love to bring your next event to life. So what do you say? Do you want our space?
Welcome back to Sidebar, a 103 The Beat podcast powered by ILTV. I'm Stephen Hanna. Let's talk about the executive branch of government, which is the Prime Minister and the Cabinet. But, all right, so this is kind of difficult to talk about them because first we have to talk about the legislative part because we have a bicameral parliament, and it'll make sense. It'll make sense. It'll make sense. So, bicameral just means that there are two chambers, right? There's the lower house with the MPs, and they are the elected officials. That's the House of Assembly. That's the guys who everybody knows. They know who those guys are. The upper house is the one with the senators. And now you must say, Stephen, no one cares about the senators. Why are they in the upper house and the cool kids who get posters and drivers and, you know, their own theme songs, why are they in the lower house? And that's a great question. because that's part of what we're going to discuss. See, technically, the Senate, theoretically, is more important than the House of Assembly with the MPs and stuff. If you remember nothing else, remember that the House of Assembly proposes laws. One of the many MPs can wake up one morning, decide that they want everyone who is named Melissa to pay 30% more on VAT, and because there's no one named Melissa who will ever be elected to Parliament, that law may pass in the House of Assembly. But even with my disdain for Melissas, I know that that's an unfair law, and that you should make such a law that is so unfair. This is where the Senate would come in, because the job of the Senate is to double check the homework of the people in the House of Assembly. And so it would leave the lower house and go to the upper chamber for them to read over, and theoretically the Senate would send it back and say, you cannot make this law because it's not enforceable. Will it apply to people with the first name Melissa? What if their middle name is Melissa? What about the people named Deborah? Because some people consider those names to be interchangeable since they both mean bee or honeybee. What about the people who are named Debbie, right? Will we charge 30% VAT on Debbie pies? What if your girlfriend is a snack? Does she also get hit with this? In that regard, the Senate should be considered higher and more powerful. I'm put an asterisk next to powerful than the House of Assembly. However, our lived reality does not necessarily bear that out. The senators are selected, and they rarely break from the party position and interrogate anything that, that their political party already signed off on. We're going to circle back to that. But first, let's go to the lower house, which is ironically also upstairs, just like the upper house. The House of Assembly, aka the MPs, I think that it's interesting as election season approaches. I have no doubt that some people are going to say, why don't we ever have political debates? Because they see it on TV all the time. In America, there are always these political debates, and you have people stand up and say, this is what I want to do, and this is why I want to do it. And another person says, oh, no. And then somebody gives a question and says, oh, well, what are you going to do about this? And the person says, I'm going to do that. And then the person says, oh, no, but you didn't do this. So here's the thing. We already have that, because that is all Parliament is. All Parliament is. Every contribution is a debate. Literally, that's what they're called. You say, hey, this is what we are proposing to do. Or we've read over what you propose to do. And then everybody else looks at it and says, I don't think so. Does this mean that? This could be wrong. And you're supposed to debate not just because you didn't come up with it or your party came up with it. Everybody's supposed to participate in this. It should be, our thought is that if you do X and Y, Z might happen. And I don't know if people are ready for Y. What people really want is Z. Is there another way to get us to Z? Can we get to Z without going to Y? That's what a parliamentary debate is supposed to be. And all this leads to the fact that, so this may be controversial. The point of the MPs is to write legislation, which is laws, to debate legislation, which is laws. So the thing that we probably need mostly in Parliament that would serve the country best is lawyers, because they are the ones that are best suited for legal debates. But the more that we make politics and Parliament and MPs about popularity, the more likely we are that we get people who aren't qualified for the job. And that isn't to say that everyone who isn't a lawyer isn't qualified for the job, but it is to say we are increasing the likelihood, if what we're looking for in our MPs is not the ability to understand law and to be able to debate law. Now, for a very long time, the argument has been, if you have a bunch of lawyers in Parliament, the lawyers will write laws to their benefit. They're going to create loopholes, and they will see loopholes, and they won't close the loopholes, and they can take advantage of the loopholes when they leave Parliament. But conversely, assuming that all lawyers aren't evil people, if there are no lawyers in Parliament, that means the people who are making the laws may not realize that there are loopholes. And then those loopholes certainly will not be closed. And so what you actually need, more so than saying we got too much lawyers in Parliament, you need to find lawyers who have good character and are intelligent, and put them into Parliament so that they can see the loopholes and they can close the loopholes because it's the right thing to do. And in my estimation, I think that would be better than discriminating against an entire industry of people by assuming that every lawyer, that everybody in that industry is bad. You know what I mean? The House of Assembly is a room full of MPs making the decisions for the country. But who is in charge? Like, who's in charge of that? I'm not talking about the speaker. All right? So you got a room full of MPs, and they look amongst themselves and they say, I think that Tom is the best among us. Tom is a sensible dude. I think he should be in the front. And if enough of them say, Tom, I have confidence in you, that person, Tom, becomes the prime minister, which is the first minister. This is another issue. The system was set up before there was such a thing as political parties. Because you're saying, like, you're like, that's never happened. I've never seen or heard about people saying, oh, let's figure out who's going to be the prime minister now. Everybody just comes in, and you know, based on which party has the largest number of seats in the House, their leader is automatically the prime minister. Well, originally, MPs were all independent. So they actually would have to pick the best person amongst the MPs to be the prime minister. But having a political party is a way to game the system. So now me and my 39 friends, we make an agreement. Like, if they win their seat in the House of Assembly, they will pick me to be the prime minister. So once we get the majority, I know I in. This is how it works, but in its initial form of what a parliament is, that's not how it's supposed to work. In fact, the Bahamas didn't even have real political parties until November 1953, because the formation of the PLP started the chain reaction of other folks creating political parties to offset the fact that the PLP found a back door to get within the system. In some ways, every party from the UBP to the COI have all been responses to the PLP. As a matter of fact, like it or not, by joining any political party, you're kind of saying the PLP is the standard. That's a matter of history. Anyway, the Prime Minister, once selected, creates his cabinet by selecting from the rest of the MPs who he would like to be. I'm saying he, as though the Prime Minister could only be a man, who they would like to be in charge of various ministries. Also, the Attorney General is in cabinet as well. We're not going to discuss the Attorney General. Now, what is a minister? A minister is like a CEO. Their job is to set policy and to move a ministry in a particular direction using the budget available. So, think about a company like Nabisco. Nabisco makes biscuits. They are literally a biscuit company. So when a CEO comes to Nabisco, his job is to make sure that the company continues to make biscuits. But depending on the CEO, he may say, hey, we should make more sweet biscuits. Or he may say, or they may say, let's make more cheese biscuits. Maybe they decide to save money by making the biscuits smaller. Or they create a diet line of biscuits that are high in fiber. So take that same concept and then apply it to a ministry. The Ministry of Health will always be in charge of health, but how they tackle health may change depending on the policy and the plan of the minister. You understand? Now, with that said, you may have spotted a problem that luckily the people who wrote our Constitution also saw coming. If the ministers are only selected from the MPs and all of the MPs are lawyers or just cool guys, we may have a problem because now we have people who they understand the law or they look cool on a poster, but they don't know how to run the Ministry of Health because they've never had to deal with a hospital, let alone PMH. Am I right? Maybe they have always been the peak specimen of health. And so they would make policies that might endanger the lives of patients because in their six-pack lawyer brain, they think that sit-ups might cure appendicitis. That's when we go back to the Senate. So one of the things that you can do as the Prime Minister, you are allowed to select up to 3 people from the Senate to be in your cabinet. And you do that because they are the best and the brightest and they understand certain areas better than everyone else. So if you utilize that, you can get a really good Minister of Health from the Senate or from the general population who otherwise may never be elected to the House of Assembly because they suck at giving speeches. But they will save thousands of lives with their policy. With that said, we also didn't talk about how you actually get senators. Senators are appointed, and that is kind of a problem. So our upper house, aka the Senate, aka the Honorable Rubber Stamp, operates kind of like the British House of Lords, except in our version, nobody inherits a seat, which thank God, right? But basically the way ours works is that everybody who gets into the House of Assembly is entitled to a percentage or a fraction of the seats in the Senate. Now, we just said how the Senate can be used to get people who have special skills, but maybe zero electability, into the cabinet so that they can help run ministries efficiently or drive them in the right direction. But remember, I said it's supposed to be like the British House of Lords. And here's the thing. In England, in order to make sure that they have only the best and brightest in the room, double checking the homework of the MPs, the House of Lords is populated with people who are, okay, so some of them are related to just dead aristocracy. That's not the part that we want to emulate or anything. But they also have people who have served their country, are honorable and wise statespersons who wish to pass along that knowledge and make this contribution to their country. Basically, the reason it's called the upper house is because the people in the Senate should be superior to the people in the House of Assembly. These should be people who they look up to, older politicians that the new guys can turn to, or when they reject a law, they explain why. But once again, our lived reality, that's not always how it's been used over here. Right now, outside of the people who are backdoored into cabinet through the Senate, oftentimes we see that persons who become senators are persons who are deemed to have political potential. It's seen as a sort of training ground, a safe place where they can gain their political legs. That's not supposed to happen. The so-called Westminster system that we claim to follow frowns on that, because in the House of Lords, once you go up to the House of Lords, you can't come down to Parliament. Once again, the door is locked. Being in the upper house is the greatest honor. That's why the age of admission for the Senate is higher than the age of admission to the House of Assembly. You shouldn't be there as though that's junior parliament. Theoretically, you can be a prime minister at the age of 21, but you have to be at least 30 to be a senator, because the Senate is not child's play. You don't put party loyalists there as a reward. You put people who actually don't want to play politics. They want to help and give their expertise to guide the country in the right direction. Because the people in the House, let's be honest, in the best of situations, sometimes the people who become MPs, they're there because they are very popular. And I may not like it, but there's nothing that we can do at this juncture to eliminate that fully from the system. And let's say, okay, theoretically, let's say you followed Stephen's grand plan of just having a bunch of lawyers inside the House of Assembly, right? And what if everybody else is right and Stephen is wrong and all lawyers are evil? Now you'd have a room full of evil lawyers. Who is going to keep them in check? The Senate is supposed to be able to say, listen, I know that you want to do this thing, but if you do this thing, it's going to backfire. Rome will burn. Everything goes down. So you really need to look over this again. And now what ends up happening is that it would make, you're putting in a safeguard in case the worst situation happens. Unfortunately, what happens now is the Senate tends to be a rubber stamp, because the people who have the majority seats in the House of Assembly to get the law passed there also have the majority number of seats in the Senate, which is another thing that we need to figure out. I don't think that senators should be affiliated with political parties, which impossible to enforce. But senators should be made up of people who, similar to like the in the ideal world, whoever is the head of state or the executive branch, it should be made up of people who are super qualified, because either they've been in parliament before, but also because they're highly skilled in specific matters that the country needs. For example, right? Let's say the government has a desire to improve education. Imagine now having a senator who's a lifelong educator, who's done work and research or figured out the best approach to education, something, but they're not just a F&M or a PLP senator. They are known for education first. So now when that bill comes through that says, I don't know, everyone under the age of 19 must attend school because X, Y, and Z, they can look at it and say, well, this isn't best practice. But also in that same session, you may have a senator who may be somebody familiar with labor. Maybe they were a labor president or something, right? And they chime in and they say, if you have all these kids graduating when they're 14, they'll have nothing to do. All they end up doing is either having babies or go getting a job or both. And then presently, we don't have enough growth in our economy to take on 5,000 new unemployed people every single year. And then in the ideal world, you would have enough persons who are qualified in the various facets that we're focused on, improving and increasing, that they'd be able to critique any new law, give this, I don't think we should go in that direction. Now, I can't stop Bahamians from Bahamianing. At the end of the day, I know I'm a little delusional. Of course, there's going to be senators who still lean in the direction of their favorite political party. But, if we remove the chance of you getting called to the major leagues, if all you have once you become a senator is the $12,000 a year salary, and there's no hope that you will ever be an MP, suddenly you realize, you know what? I have to do this for the sole purpose of this job. You say there is no great reward in just rubber stamping bills, so let me actually read it and figure out what contribution can I make. This is all that people will remember me for, and I don't want to be the person that rubber stamped a dumb idea that destroyed the country, because at that point you'll be putting your name and your legacy on the line. Also, we may need to vote for senators, but again, it can't be a free-for-all. How is it possible that we don't have hard stipulate? I get why MPs should be every man. Anybody should be able to run for MP once you hit a certain age criteria. But I do feel like we definitely need to vote for some other things, but restrict it based on what is your public service. And you have to hit certain goals within the public service in order to run for that position, and then let the public select from that. Serve your country in some way that we can measure.
In here all of a sudden, total stranger. I'm calling you Rick and Sheila.
I win. At Island Lock, we take sports seriously. Get ready to experience the thrill of winning anytime and any place. Bet in real time and live the thrill of every play while watching your winnings stack up. It's your chance to score big with fast payouts and a world-class experience. Get in the game and bet the Bahamian way with Island Luck Sportsbook.
It's flying here in Denver. Oh my!
Welcome back to Sidebar, a 103 The Beat podcast powered by ILTV. I'm Stephen Hanna. We had a lot of fun today. And by that I mean, yay, me going over the most boring thing in the world. I think there is one thing I would like to add to the overall idea of what we talked about today when it comes to government. So there's this idea that we need to wait. That, hey man, you're on the right path. If you keep your head down and you wait your turn, things will work out. You just gotta wait, man. Have some patience. And that is how people of my parents' generation, how they were tricked. Because now they're all in their 60s and their 70s, and the people who they were waiting on to gently hand them the reins of power are still, sometimes they're still calling the shots. Unless they've already died. But a lot of them never really turned over the reins of power to their children's generation. Now, some of them did try to turn over the reins of power to their children, but that is generally profoundly rejected. But in reality, how many of them really turned over the power to their children's generation? It didn't really happen. And that's because power does not concede. Power must be seized. There is no reason for you to look any further for any other example than the father of the nation. Lyndon Oscar Pinling was running this country in his 30s. So help me understand, under what circumstance are we considering 45-year-old men to be young men? Under what circumstance are we considering 50-year-old men to be young men? What circumstance are we considering a 60-year-old man to be, oh, he's a young man, he's got years ahead? These are not young men by any stretch of the imagination. For the 10,000 years of human history, a 60-year-old man has been an old man. We expect people to be some level of dead by the time they're 70. What did the Bible say? You got 70, and if by reason of strength 80. So if you make it to 80, that's solely because you eat vegetables and stuff. What? We don't really expect people to make it past 70, which is why the retirement age is 65. So like literally everyone's counting, hey, you get 5 years of fun and no responsibility. After that, please exit the planet. Capitalism is really the worst. But most cultures recognize by the time you hit 30, you should have had experienced enough life to run something. You're halfway to dead. You should either already be running a household, which not in this economy, or running a business, which not in this economy. But you definitely should have had enough life experience to have a vision of how to run a country. Once again, that's why the minimum age of entry for the heavyweight government positions tend to be in your 30s. You got to be 30 to be a senator, not 55, but we're treating 30 like it's so young and 25 like it's so young, and that's ridiculous. The truth is, we are failing multiple generations by not having the faith in them to do anything at young ages, because no one had the faith in us to do it. And we are like, it took us forever to get to this point, and I only really got a real taste of power at 45, and you want me to turn that over now to somebody who's 25? I just get it. Yeah, be Mandela. Be great for a term and a half, and then, pass on to the next guy. Anyway, for the brave and the bold decisions to be made that are required to move the country forward, you need young people. Because sometimes, and this is going to hurt someone's feelings, but listen carefully. Sometimes it helps to have young people because young people are stupid. Young people do not have the benefit of having experienced full consequences, and therefore they are making moves based on the importance of the moves and not the fear and trembling of what might possibly happen. So if you have a young person who is, they need to be right thinking, morally minded, willing to listen to reason, but also willing to make big choices. They can change the world. Look at all of our martyrs. None of them were 40. Jesus, Malcolm, Martin, Huey, even Tupac and Biggie. These guys, did any of them make it to 30? Yes, Jesus was 33. And they didn't make it to 40. Having a younger person around, they're going to bring a different perspective. This is the world that they grew up in. So they're building off of this. They don't see how far we've come, which could be a good thing. Because they are not going to be satisfied that, oh, we made it this far, that's progress, we could rest here. Let's just sustain what we have. Younger people will say, we have roads. Because in their mind, we've always had roads. So now we need flying cars. And while we may never get flying cars for various reasons, because they are building off of the concept of roads and not the concept of, in the early 1900s, 90% of Nassau was unpaved. We are going to move forward in what is achievable. And yeah, that applies to age. But what about like other things like race and gender and all those things that people say, hey man, you just wait your turn. It's almost there and like we're not ready for that. Technically, my friends, we've already had female prime ministers multiple times in our history. The fact that the country didn't catch fire when Mother Pratt was the prime minister or the acting prime minister for 2 months when Perry Christie had a stroke in 2005 is proof that women can run the country so well you don't even notice. We don't remember it. And then like my good cousin, Glennis Hanna Martin, was the acting prime minister when both Philip Brave Davis and Chester Cooper was out the country. You remember it. Because nothing happened. We didn't die. They've done it before. But we make it seem like such a big deal, and it's mostly the media's fault, when it's even presented as an option. It's like, honestly, I think the public probably has less issue with it than the people who are running the actual political parties. Because they're the ones who are thinking, if we run a woman or if we have a woman leader, nobody's going to vote for us. What are you talking about? Of course we would. If the woman is a good candidate. Because sometimes the best man for the job is a woman. But also sometimes the best representative is a man. But also sometimes the best representative for the Ministry of Youth, Sports and Culture is going to be an old man whose only experience with culture is that he likes John Wick movies. Which I'm guessing... Anyway, I guess what I'm trying to say is that if you want us to vote for more women, you got to put better women up. If you want us to vote for more young people, just give us good young people to vote for. But we got to stop with the weird superficial games where we use race and gender and age as political tools. And then we are all ignoring the character and what these people have to offer. They just take really nice pictures. They have really straight teeth. Anyway, I feel myself slipping into a rant that's going to inevitably end on rich people. So I'm going to wrap it up now. So I'd like to thank you so much for joining me today. Once again, this has been Sidebar, a 103 The Beat podcast, powered by ILTV. I'm Stephen Hanna. True God still.